What if the only person who could stop a cyber attack threatening a billion-dollar empire was an 8-year-old girl in a hoodie carrying a broken notebook and a secret no one saw coming? What if that child, ignored by security and visible to executives, walked straight into the heart of chaos and did what no engineer, no CEO, no firewall could do? This isn't a story about luck. It's about genius growing in silence, and the day it refused to stay hidden. But just when everyone thought the system was saved, a shadow from the past sent a chilling message. Welcome home, Aster. Who was behind it? And why did they know her secret alias? Stay with us, because what happens next will not only shock the most powerful man in the company, but change the future of countless forgotten kids forever. Have you ever watched the world collapse one flickering light bulb at a time and realized the only person who understood the dominoes was a child no taller than your desk? That was the unseen rhythm of Sophie Mayfield's mornings. At 6:30 a.m., she climbed the back steps of Orion Tower, her mother's cleaning cart rattling ahead like a reluctant parade float. Janet pushed through the service door, shoulders rounded, eyes fixed on gray terrazzo floors, so pristine they mirrored the fluorescent ceiling. Sophie slipped inside exactly 6 steps behind her, counting each tile like a secret code. Clearwater, Illinois still hid under a violet dawn, but Orion's systems buzzed as if the sun had already declared noon. Glass elevators hummed, espresso machines hissed, and analysts in slim-fit blazers compared stock dashboards with the intensity of gamblers studying cards. Nobody noticed the girl in a washed-out hoodie hugging a frayed backpack. That anonymity was Sophie's armor in her laboratory. While Janet vanished into the 67th floor restrooms, Sophie took her customary perch on a leather bench in the lobby legs, swinging eyes bright behind scratched glasses. Inside the pack slept treasures grown-ups dismissed as garbage. A cracked flash drive, a half-disassembled digital watch, a spiral notebook swollen with rain stains and densely packed diagrams. Sophie flipped to a blank page and began sketching a motherboard that could, in theory, eavesdrop on wayward radio frequencies and stitch the fragments into coherent whisper like a spyglass for invisible signals. She drew in a frenzy pencil, scraping oblivious to the river of polished shoes streaming past. Then the lights hiccuped. A low hum shivered through the lobby as every wall-mounted screen blinked charcoal black. The reception kiosk emitted 3 tortured chirps and died. A beat of stunned silence swelled, followed by the unmistakable crack of terror. Phones leapt into hands. A project manager cursed so loudly even the cappuccino machine paused. "What do you mean the core network is frozen?" someone barked into a headset. Across the marble, an HR director clutched her tablet, knuckles white. "We're dead in the water. Presentation starts in 40 minutes. Sophie's heart hammered, but for once it wasn't from hiding. Code scrolled through her mind: unbidden socket, overflow loop, recursive deadlock, false flag, heartbeat. She'd read about that kind of surgical strike on shadow forums at Elmwood Cyber Lounge when nobody was watching. Only a predator who truly knew a system wrote sabotage polite enough to look like user error. A senior security engineer kicked an elevator door in frustration. "This can't be happening, not today." In the cacophony, nobody saw the 8-year-old slip off the bench and edge closer to the cluster of frantic adults. She remained a ghost in their peripheral vision until curiosity outweighed caution. Sophie cleared her throat. "Did you check for a socket overflow loop?" Her voice was feather soft but carried like a pin drop in a cathedral. 10 heads snapped toward her. The nearest man, a towering account exec, scoffed. "Kid, we're a little busy." But another face registered something different. Ryan Alden, the lone intern with badge still hanging crookedly, frowned at her question gears, visibly turning. He held his tongue, stepped aside, and motioned Sophie forward as if opening a secret door. Sophie hesitated, clutching her notebook like a shield. The grown-ups were spiraling. They had credentials, degree frames, stock options, and not a single map out of the darkness. She, on the other hand, had spent nights reviving dead radios in Birch Hollow apartments, because silence there felt even colder than static. She exhaled and inched closer. That was when Garrett Whitlow strode out of the executive elevator, trench coat, billowing blue-gray eyes slicing through panic. The billionaire founder of Orion Systems radiated success the way supernovas radiate heat. Yet at that moment, his expression was volcanic. The biggest client demo of the fiscal year was seconds from imploding. His gaze flicked past Ryan, past the engineers, and landed confused on the small girl gripping a pencil. "Who's responsible for letting children roam a restricted floor?" Garrett's voice was ice-cracking. Ryan swallowed. "Sir, she might have spotted something we missed." A risky pause. Sophie could hear her pulse in her ears. She lifted the notebook, hands trembling but determined, and pointed to a rapid sketch of intersecting loops. "If the attacker nested a buffer overflow inside the authentication socket, your failsafes would isolate themselves. The system's alive, just paralyzed." She swallowed. "You need to break the loop, not reboot." The lobby fell into an uncanny hush. Fluorescence flickered again, as if the building itself leaned closer to listen. Garrett looked ready to dismiss her, but something in the child's meticulous diagram anchored his gaze. A memory flickered behind his stern facade, but he shoved it aside. "Give her a terminal," Ryan said quietly. "We're out of options." The CTO barked a protest, but Garrett lifted a hand. Pride could drown later. Payroll depended on salvation now. 5 minutes, he said. Ryan guided Sophie behind the reception desk, hoisted her onto a swivel chair so her sneakers dangled. The keyboard looked colossal beneath her small fingers. She inhaled, letting the chaos blur. Command prompts bloomed across the screen like satellites. She typed with the certainty of someone disarming a bomb whose twists she'd memorized in dreams. 1 layer deep, 2 layers, Sophie felt the system's pulse, erratic but intact, buried under malignant loops. She hunted the mimic code and injected a counter-routine so lean it fit inside a tweet. Enter. A soft chime rang out. Across Orion Tower, dormant monitors sparked to life, status bars sprinted to green, and the lobby lights steadied into warm daylight. 30 seconds of shocked silence gave way to an explosion of relief laughter, applause, a few incoherent prayers. Sophie slid off the chair, clutching her notebook, eyes flitting toward exit paths in case applause turned to accusations. Instead, Ryan's face broke into an incredulous grin. Even Garrett's stone facade cracked, though, whether in admiration or alarm, no one could say. Part 1 ends with Sophie standing beneath Orion Tower's 20-foot logo, a child who just rewrote the odds while a billionaire wonders if he's met his own second chance or his greatest liability. Thanks for watching. Sorry for the interruption, but we hope you will help us improve our content in the future. What would you have done if you were Ryan, trust a child's wild hypothesis, or follow protocol and watch everything burn? Do you think Garrett should reward Sophie's genius or fear what he can't control? And most of all, if you had a hidden talent the world ignored, would you dare to speak up like Sophie did today? Let us know in the comments and tell us which country you're watching from. Ryan Alden had always imagined his first triumph at Orion Systems would involve a crisp promotion, email, maybe a celebratory latte, not a child hacker, and 3 furious vice presidents. Yet 20 minutes after the network roared back to life, he found himself hustling Sophie Mayfield into an executive elevator, while security guards argued about liability clauses they'd never read. Somewhere above, Garrett Whitlow was convening an emergency board call. Somewhere below, Janet Mayfield still scrubbed floors, unaware her daughter had just saved a multi-billion-dollar launch. The elevator doors parted on the 72nd floor executive war room territory. Frosted glass, matte black tables, a skyline wide enough to steal your breath. Garrett stood at the head tie, discarded sleeves rolled, commanding a conference speaker that spat frantic voices. "We need ironclad confirmation the breach is contained before Morgan Stanwyck logs on," a board member insisted. Garrett's reply was cold steel. "Containment is temporary. I want elimination." Then he spotted Sophie Hoodie dangling past her knees, clutching the spiral notebook like a life vest. The room fell silent. Garrett closed the call without apology. "Sophie," he began, tasting the softness of the name against his usual bark. "You stopped a $200 million catastrophe, but whoever wrote that exploit left a footprint in our kernel, an invitation. Can you trace it?" She pushed her glasses up, scanned the 12 adults in Armani armor, and nodded once. Ryan felt every heartbeat in the pause that followed. The CTO slid a laptop across the table as if it were explosive. "Root access," he muttered. Sophie perched on a chair and plunged into code, her fingers blurrier than the jittery stock ticker overhead. Logs flared open, nested tunnels, Ghost credentials and outbound signal pinging one static IP every 60 seconds. The exploit wasn't just sabotage, it was broadcasting telemetry proof that someone somewhere still listened. Remote handshakes, Sophie whispered. Give me a clean line out in 20 seconds. Ryan routed an isolated fiber link while Garrett's jaw tightened. The air smelled of burnt espresso and fear of headlines. Sophie fired a tracer that rode the handshake backward through VPN mazes and bulletproof hosts. The map on the wall bloomed red, then narrowed to a single dot, a lakeside warehouse in rural Wisconsin. Orion's own decommissioned R&D lab sold off last year to an anonymous shell. Garrett swore under his breath. That facility was scrubbed. Every drive destroyed. Apparently, Ryan said someone kept a spare key. Before Garrett could reply, the board line lit up again, this time with Morgan Stanwyck's lead negotiator. The launch demo was due in 18 minutes. Canceling meant forfeiting the contract and detonating the stock price. Proceeding with an active threat could bury them under lawsuits. Garrett stared at Sophie, the decision calcifying behind his eyes. We can't fight what we don't understand, he said, then turned to Ryan. You're with me. We take a jet, crack that warehouse, and rip the server out by hand if we have to. The CTO blanched. You're proposing a field op based on coordinates from an 8-year-old. Garrett's glare could have melted circuitry. An 8-year-old who just saved this company. Suit up or step aside. Janet Mayfield burst through the elevator at that exact moment, breathless mop bucket abandoned in the hall. A manager must have tipped her off. She saw Sophie flanked by executives and her face went paper white. What have you done to my daughter? Janet cried. Sophie bolted from her chair and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. Garrett softened barely. Ms. Mayfield, your daughter isn't in trouble. She's the reason Orion is still standing. Janet's lips parted, searching for words that didn't exist. Sophie looked up. Mom, they need me to finish what I started. Janet's gaze flicked to Garrett, to Ryan, finally landing on Sophie's shaking hands. Will you be safe? She asked, voice crystalline with terror. Ryan knelt to Sophie's level. I won't let anything happen to her, he said, meaning every syllable. Garrett added, she'll ride beside me, not behind me. Surprisingly, that convinced Janet more than any legal promise. She kissed Sophie's forehead and stepped back, shoulders straightening, as if she just decided the world owed her family a debt. Within 40 minutes, a company jet cut through cloud cover, Ryan strapping into a jump seat, Sophie beside him, notebook balanced on her knees. Garrett stood by the cockpit door, pacing cell phone, buzzing nonstop. He ignored every call. Instead, he watched Sophie annotate packet captures in green marker, drawing arrows like constellations only she understood. The hum of turbines became a lullaby of shared purpose. 2 black SUVs awaited them on a deserted runway. The Wisconsin air smelled of wet pine and unfinished winters. At the abandoned lab, rusted signage still bore Orion's old logo, half peeled like a forgotten scab. Power lines sagged, yet faint electric glow seeped from basement windows. Garrett's security chief produced bolt cutters. Ryan produced a courage he wasn't sure he owned. Sophie slipped latex gloves from her hoodie pocket, always prepared. Inside, the corridors looked mummified in dust, except for a single fresh trail of shoe prints leading downstairs. Servers hummed behind a steel door labeled Data Vault. Sophie pressed an ear to the lock panel. Biometric spoof. It expects Garrett's palm. He obliged, hand steady. The door gasped open. Racks of outdated hardware blinked anemically. In the center sat one sleek tower, clearly newer. Red LEDs pulsed like a heartbeat. Sophie connected a diagnostics tablet. Lines of code, her own override, flashed, then a message bloomed across the screen. Welcome home, Astor. Sophie's breath hitched. No one else recognized the alias she'd used in forgotten chat rooms back when she soldered hope out of trash. Someone from those midnight forums was talking to her. A second line typed itself, "Did you like my test?" Sophie's fingers hovered. Ryan and Garrett exchanged looks. "Who the hell is on the other side?" Ryan murmured. Sophie typed, "Why risk people's jobs?" response, "Because they never listen to quiet voices." "Listen now." Alarms shrieked. The tower began a thermal overload, countdown 10 minutes until meltdown and data wipe. Garrett barked for the security team to pull power, but Sophie shouted, "No. If you sever power, we lose the trace and the clue." She shoved her tablet into Ryan's hands. "Hold this steady." She crawled behind the rack, pried open a panel, and located the coolant relay. We can spoof a shutdown, cool the CPU, and keep the core alive, she called over the siren. Garrett tore off his blazer, used it to muffle scorching metal, while Sophie rerouted wiring with a screwdriver barely thicker than a toothpick. 5 minutes left. The countdown display flickered, dipping under 90 degrees Celsius, cool enough to survive. The siren strangled to silence. Then the main monitor lit again. Clever Aster. Find me then. Coordinates spat across the screen, longitude and latitude, pointing somewhere far beyond Wisconsin Clearwater itself. Ryan copied them. Sophie unplugged, stomach twisting with dread. The hacker was taunting her on home turf inside her city, maybe a single bus ride from Birch Hollow Apartments. Garrett's phone finally rang with a call he couldn't ignore. The board demanding a go, no-go on the launch demo in 3 minutes. Ryan, sweating, said, "If those coordinates lead to a live operator, we could neutralize the threat tonight." Garrett's gaze raked the room, or walked straight into a trap. Sophie looked from one to the other. "Traps are predictable," she said quietly. "Silence isn't. We go." Back on the runway, Garrett gave the board a single-sentence update. Demo proceeds. Contingency secured. The shares would hold, but now 3 lives were chained to a beacon, blinking somewhere in Clearwater's industrial district. As the jet lifted, Sophie pressed her forehead to the window, city lights glittering like broken circuitry. She had cracked the code, saved a Titan, and awakened an adversary who spoke her secret language. The sky felt both limitless and terrifying. Night draped over Clearwater's old rail yard like a theater curtain. When the sedan stopped outside Warehouse 14B, a squat concrete husk lit only by a single erratic bulb above the loading bay. Sophie Mayfield stepped onto gravel that crunched like dry bones, notebook tucked under one arm. Ryan Alden beside her, Garrett Whitlow, a silent sentinel behind. The coordinates from the server pointed here. Everything else was guesswork and pulse-quick fear. A chain-link gate hung open. Inside, rows of rusted shelving framed a makeshift command post, 3 monitors, a humming generator, and a laptop whose screen glowed with the words, "Hello again, Aster." Sophie inched forward. "I'm here," she said, voice catching on the echo. Why all of this? A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman hardly older than Ryan, lanky eyes ringed with sleepless nights. Her sweatshirt bore the faded emblem of a defunct coding boot camp. She raised empty hands to show she wasn't armed. "Because whispers get drowned in boardrooms," she replied. I had to shout in the only language they respect: panic. Garrett stiffened. "You almost cratered livelihoods to make a point." She met his gaze without flinching. "Livelihoods are already cratered for the kids who never get a badge past security." She pointed at Sophie. "Except this one slipped through." Sophie's heart hammered. "You were on those forums," she realized. "You used to sign your posts, Nightingale." The woman nodded, a flicker of pride and regret. "I watched you teach yourself trigonometry at 3 a.m. I watched you revive dead circuitry with nothing but a breadboard and stubborn hope. Then I watched companies like his bury kids like us under unpaid internships and golden ticket gatekeeping. So I built a riddle only the right mind could solve." Garrett exhaled, the sound more tired than angry. "You wanted to force my hand." "Not force," Nightingale corrected. "Invite." With a keystroke, she projected a blueprint mentor net, an open-source platform pairing underrepresented prodigies with industry veterans, funded by micro-donations, no corporate strings. "I needed resources and proof of concept," she said. Orion's systems was the loudest stage. Ryan whistled under his breath. "And the most combustible." Nightingale's shoulders sagged. "I knew the risk. I never intended to destroy data, only freeze it. But I underestimated how fast chaos snowballs." Her gaze moved to Sophie. "You solved in minutes what professionals couldn't in hours." That's the headline I needed. Sophie glanced at Garrett. "She doesn't want money. She wants partnership." Garrett paced shoes, stirring dust. The billionaire strategist who negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking suddenly looked like a man cracking open memories he'd padlocked. He remembered himself at 14 soldering scrap radios in a group home the night a social worker told him genius meant nothing without opportunity. He'd built an empire chasing that voice, then forgotten it in the roar of quarterly earnings. He stopped in front of Nightingale. "The way you asked was reckless," he said, tone low. "But your question matters." He turned to Sophie. and you gave me the answer before I even knew I was looking." He held out a hand to Nightingale. "Let's finish this the right way. Orion backs MentorNet, full servers, pro bono, legal no, NDA muzzles. On one condition," Nightingale raised an eyebrow. "Condition?" He nodded toward Sophie. "She helps design the curriculum. No more gatekeepers." Tears sprang to Sophie's eyes. She blinked them away, unfamiliar with triumph that felt this warm. Nightingale's smile started crooked, then straightened into something hopeful. She clasped Garrett's hand. "Deal." Ryan exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Can we please deactivate the warehouse bomb code now?" He pointed at the laptop still ticking. Nightingale smirked, typed 3 commands, and the red countdown winked out like a bad dream. Hours later, sunrise painted Clearwater gold. Sophie sat on Orion Tower's roof patio, sipping hot cocoa from a paper cup, legs dangling over the edge of a planter notebook open on her lap. Garrett joined her, suit jacket folded over his arm. He placed a new badge beside her cup, platinum, not plastic. "Sophie Mayfield, Junior Systems Architect. No age limit on genius," he said. "Policies already filed." Sophie traced the letters throat tight. "You really mean it?" Garrett gestured toward the city waking below. "I can't rewrite where you started, but together we can redraw where others finish." Janet arrived, then, eyes puffy from a sleepless night, but shining. She hugged Sophie so tight the cocoa nearly spilled. Garrett stepped back, granting them space he could never fill, but choosing finally not to look away from tenderness. 3 weeks later, MentorNet's beta launched with 50 volunteer engineers and 200 teenage applicants from forgotten zip codes. Nightingale live-streamed the kickoff from Orion's auditorium. No masks, no aliases, flanked by Sophie and Garrett. Reporters fired questions about liability and corporate image. Garrett answered, "If your brand can't survive kindness, build a better brand." The room erupted in applause. That evening, Orion's stock climbed anyway. Apparently, markets respect redemption arcs too. Ryan texted Sophie a screenshot of the green arrow. She replied with a gif of a rocket ship and a single word, "liftoff." In Birch Hollow Apartments, life changed in quieter ways. A maintenance crew finally rewired the hallway lights. Sophie gifted her cracked flash drive to Mario with instructions scrawled in bold Sharpie. "Every glitch is just a puzzle." Janet framed Sophie's first paycheck stub, an artifact of possibility, and pinned it above the stovetop like a portal to larger worlds. On the last night of summer, Sophie returned to the Warehouse 14B site, now cleared for conversion into MentorNet's first makerspace. She walked the empty floor palm resting on a support beam. She thought about frequencies, how some signals travel years before finding a receiver, and about voices once drowned out that could now shape constellations. Nightingale appeared from an office doorway with 2 mugs of tea. They sat on the concrete backs against warm steel and watched electricians string LED strands overhead. Nightingale nudged Sophie's shoulder. "You realize you're the youngest person to rewrite Orion's firewall policy, and the only one who insisted the new rulebook fit on a single page." Sophie smiled, small and fierce. "Complex systems shouldn't have complicated hearts." The lights blinked on, bathing them in soft white. For the first time since she could remember, Sophie saw her future not as a labyrinth, but as a blueprint traced in light. Now the camera pulls back to you, the viewer. Sophie's journey started with a whisper nobody heard until the day she spoke louder than the storm. What part of her story sparked something in you? If this ending left you hopeful, curious, or even a little braver, type the number 100 in the comments so we know the message landed. And tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from tonight? Share this video with a friend who might be holding a hidden blueprint of their own. Let's see how many quiet geniuses we can light up together.